Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to properly use past papers and give you some tips that no one really tells you about. Since everyone on the internet seems to understand the hype around past papers, teachers and other students alike will tell you that past papers are the best resource you can use for your exam revision. But what I've seen from friends using past papers is that the majority of people actually use these wrong and ultimately end up not using them to their full potential. So today I'm going to be giving you some tips about how you can maximise the reward you get from doing past papers. The first tip I can give you is about knowing when to start using them. All too often I see people starting to use past papers before they have an actual grasp of the content. They open the past paper, they realise they can only do about 30% of the questions and so just use their nose to answer the rest. Now, this may feel productive, but you've essentially just wasted 70% of that paper and your notes have answered that rather than you. Instead, only start when you think you have a good grasp of all of the content. Before then, you should use past paper questions to hone in any topics that you're unfamiliar about to ensure that you have a relatively good understanding of these before going into these past papers. Once you've got high enough accuracy on these past paper questions, say you're getting 70 to 80% of them correct, you're familiarising yourself with the mark schemes, about what kind of language they want in their answers, only then should you start to consider to use past papers. Once you use this technique, you'll actually realise when you're starting these past papers, you're not only able to do more of the questions and give them a better go, but you're also getting a higher accuracy, and this can also boost your exam-related confidence, which is also very underestimated. Although it's good in revision to start early, provided you have enough time and you're not cramming, don't start past papers too early and only start when you have a good enough accuracy already on the questions. Another tip I can give that really helped me was to print out your past papers and do them on paper rather than digitally. If you don't have access to a printer or only have limited access to a printer, even just doing 1 or 2 on paper as opposed to 0 will definitely boost your exam day confidence, as it gives you the same feel of how you'd be doing the exam in the real exam. And so you're not doing it on paper for the first time. It sounds silly, but this acclimatization really does go a long way, especially for STEM-related subjects where you have to do certain measurements. I found that when I was doing these digitally, I just skipped these questions, and therefore these skills were under-practiced in my revision. A pro tip from me is that if you do maths, instead of having to print out reams and reams of paper for every single past paper, the majority of which are just straight lines, instead on your laptop or your iPad you can have the questions and then just answer them on paper, so that you're having the sensation of writing your answers on paper, but you're not having to distress the environment and distress your printer by printing out so much redundant paper. This is an example of how it looked for me. I essentially was just reading the questions off my iPad and then writing them on my Pocket Pad, and I found that worked really well. But for sciences, I do recommend just printing them out and writing on them because they have the designated areas for you to write in. My third tip is regarding usage of notes. I touched on this briefly earlier, but I'd say try and limit the amount you're using your notes on the past papers. At the start, it will feel very uncomfortable, but try and get through the whole paper before checking your notes. This is important, as if you get used to checking any uncertainties whenever they crop up, you subconsciously condition your brain into receiving comfort and safety whenever it encounters difficulty. This subconsciously affects your performance, something you really don't want for exam day. Instead, try drawing an asterisk next to any questions you're unsure of and come back to them during your review. At that point, you can check your notes in a different colour, note down anything that you may have learnt. This is a far superior method and will prevent your brain being trained into always being able to get the answers, which is not realistic. My next tip is about timing and the conditions in which you do your paper. As far as you can, you should try and do as many past papers as you can in the timed conditions as you would do them in the exam. This is often 2 to 3 hours long. The reasoning behind this is when you space them out, they're no longer past papers, they just become past question practice. The mix of questions in the past papers is what makes them different, but also the timing and the fact that in such a short space of time, you're confronted with many different topics from all different areas of your spec all mixed together. And I think the sooner you can get used to having to do all of this under time pressure, the better. Furthermore, training to sustain your focus for this long period of time will also better prepare you for the real exam where you'll have to do this. And now, one of my most vital tips that helped me hugely during my A-level prep, and that is making mistake logs. I think the main benefit of past papers not only comes from doing them, but also from learning from them and being able to reflect on those mistakes and analyse them and therefore grow. After you've completed the paper, you should go through every single question you got wrong and write it down somewhere. Eventually, you'll collate a long list of these mistakes you made. And how you structure your mistake log is also really important. So I would recommend for longer answer questions, first of all, write out the question and then write out the certain marking points with the specific vocabulary that they use in the mark scheme, ensuring to include any words in bold or underlined, as these mean these words are necessary for the mark. Furthermore, I would also recommend writing down exactly why you got that question wrong. So was it you ran out of time? Did you have a fundamental misunderstanding about the content itself? Or did you just get tripped up by wording in the question? Or was it just a silly mistake? I would then write a few personalised lines to myself about how to prevent that mistake again in the future. For example, if I make a silly slip in the calculation, I would write exactly where that happened and how to prevent that. For example, in chemistry, remember to multiply or divide by the mole ratio was something that came up a lot. And so just drilling that home in your mistake log will be really beneficial. I would also use my mistake log to write any general exam advice, and I recommend you do the same. Also, something which you may find beneficial is noting down any near misses. So any questions that you did technically get the marks for when you were doing them, but when you were doing them in the paper, you felt slightly uncertain, it took longer than you would have liked. I'd then include these in the mistake log as well, but also add a note that technically you got it right, but it wasn't an optimal answer. So for things like benefits of the doubt, note those down as well. I'll now show you a couple of my mistake logs. This is mine for chemistry. I've written down certain notes about things that I need to remember. For example, I've put here, don't forget that CN reacts with H+ to form a carboxylic acid, organic chemistry. Bonus points if you understand that. And then for questions where I've missed out certain marking points, I've written down the question and then the marking points below. Similarly, I've pointed out when things have been silly mistakes, when I've had misunderstanding, things like that. And ultimately, I then progressed on to digitalised notes. I made whole tables and analysis grids with colour coding about where mistakes were coming up. And that was more useful for me closer to the time around my A-levels. Why does this work? Well, depending on your exam board, many people think it's rare that the exact same question will come up again. And this is true, but many exam boards repeat styles of questions, and so by deliberately acknowledging these mistakes, you subconsciously teach your brain how to answer this style of question. This means you'll be intuitively less likely to miss out on marks when this style of question comes up, even if you don't realise it. And it doesn't have to be a carbon copy of that question for this to work. Even with questions that have similar fundamental principles, although the wording and the scenario may be completely different, your brain will tune in to your past mistakes and you will be better equipped to answer that question. Furthermore, making these mistake logs gives you some light casual revision that you can do on the morning of your exam, as it's a mix of the topics that you find hardest. Reading through these on the morning of your exam is much more productive than just mindlessly scrolling through all of your notes from all of your topics. I found that before each of my A-levels, I'd solely read my mistake logs rather than all of my notes, as these notes are specific to you and therefore can help you the best. And a very important piece of advice that I have to give you guys is know when to stop doing past papers. So I'd say 3 or 4 days before your first exam or before your exam season starts, just completely stop the past papers altogether, because they are exhausting. They do cause great fatigue on your brain, and you really don't want to be exhausting your brain before you do the real thing. So when you feel you're confident, just stop, because then at that point doing more could actually cause more harm than the small amount of benefit you would get from doing more past papers. So don't feel pressurized to do every single past paper, and it's totally fine if you've left some out. But don't exhaust yourself and look after yourself, guys. Thank you so much for watching today's video about past papers. I really hope it did help. If it did, feel free to like and smash that subscribe button. I'll be posting more videos shortly. Hope you guys have a great day. Good luck with whatever you're up to, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.